Well, welcome, first year students. Welcome to confirmation. This is for confirmation for Our Saviors and First Lutheran. Now, today we're going to talk a little bit about what we call the Babylonian Captivity. So, what ended up happening was a long time ago, the Israelites didn't follow the law. And you see, their whole journey that ended up having them leave their homes and have to go to Babylon because they were in exile. So what that means is that they were required to leave their home and they couldn't come back. That's what exile means. And the reason why we call it the Babylonian captivity is because the Babylonians were keeping them captive when they did it. And it involves a lot of sections of the Bible. So this is not a single book. This is more like 4 or 5 books. And so we're going to go over it really quickly in about 10 minutes. And so if you're confused after the end of this, save your confusion for when we return to in-person studies. And we will all try to answer your questions then. Or you could just send me an email and I'll answer it, or call me and I'll talk to you about it. All right. So I thought we'd start out with this question. What is a punishment and what is a consequence? And the reason why that's important is because we need to understand what is going on here. Did God punish the Israelites, or did God just tell them not to do something and they disobeyed and something happened? All right, now let's watch the video.
Punishment or consequence? Two things that can appear to be the same thing if you don't know the difference. Take Terry here, for example. She's thinking about climbing that old oak tree, even though her parents have specifically told her not to. They told Terry not to climb that dangerously tall tree because they know that she might, say, fall out of it and hurt herself. Now, is this a punishment or a consequence? It's a consequence. Consequences are things that happen as a direct result of our actions. Terry climbed the tree, Terry fell out of the tree, and Terry probably broke something. No one made something bad happen to her. Isn't that right, Terry? And then there's Barry. Barry was thinking about defacing this wall, which he knows he shouldn't do. But he did it anyway. And for that, Barry received 50 hours of community service picking up litter. Now, was this a consequence or was it a punishment? It's a punishment. A punishment comes from an outside force which applies disciplinary measures for unwanted behavior. The wall Barry vandalized didn't make him pick up that trash. The law did. Isn't that right, Barry? Now that we're all experts on consequences and punishment, how about we check in on, say, the ancient Israelites? Remember the Israelites? God's chosen people, with whom God had made an everlasting covenant. Well, just like Terry and Barry, the Israelites had been warned about doing certain things. They had been warned by God to not worship idols. A warning the Israelites frequently chose to ignore. And because the Israelites had turned their backs on God, the Babylonians invaded Israel. And the survivors were then sent into exile as slaves in Babylon for 70 years. So, was this a consequence or a punishment? Oh, would you look at that? We're out of time. Thanks for joining us on Punishment or Consequence. We'll see you next time.
Well, all right. So one of the first things that we want to look at here is what is a consequence and what is a punishment, right? So the traditional way of reading the Bible on the Babylonian captivity is it's a punishment. And so let me read from the Net Bible, which is one of the better translations out there. And anybody that wants to disagree with me on this one, the Net Bible says why they picked what they did, where the NIV and New Revised Standard Version does not. Feel free to school me on Hebrew. But I'm open to other interpretations, but this interpretation is coming from the Net Bible. So, in the 4th year, so this is Jeremiah 25, verses 1 through 14. In the 4th year that Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, was king of Judah, the Lord spoke to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah. That was the same as the 1st year that Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylon. So the prophet Jeremiah spoke to all the people of Judah and to all the people who were living in Jerusalem. And for the last 23 years, from the 13th year that Josiah, son of Ammon, was ruling Judah, until now, the Lord's messages have come to me, and I have told them to you over and over again, but you would not listen. Over and over again, the Lord has sent his servants and prophets to you, but you have paid no attention. He said through them, each of you must turn from your wicked ways and stop doing evil things that you are doing. If you do, I will allow you to continue to live here in the land that I gave you and your ancestors as lasting possession. Do not pay allegiance to other gods and worship and serve them. Do not make me angry by the things you do. Then I will not cause you any harm. So now the Lord says, but you have not listened to me, but you have made me angry, and by the things you have done. Thus you have brought harm onto yourselves. There's the key right there. Therefore, the Lord of heaven's armies says, you have not listened to what I said. So the Lord, I affirm that I will send for the peoples of the north and my servant King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. I will bring them against this land and his inhabitants and all the nations that surround it. I will utterly destroy the land, its inhabitants, and the surrounding nations, and make them everlasting ruins. I will make them objects of horror and hissing scorn. I will put an end to the sounds of joy and gladness and celebration of brides and grooms in the land. I will put an end to the sound of the people grinding meal. I'll put an end to the lamps shining in their houses. This whole area will become a wasteland. These nations will be subject to the king of Babylon for 70 years. But when the 70 years are over, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation for their sins. I will make the land of Babylon everlasting ruin. The Lord, I affirm it. I will bring that land everything I would, and bring it on everything that's written in the book. I will bring it everything that Jeremiah prophesies against all nations. For many nations and great kings will make slaves of the king of Babylon and his nations too. I will repay them for all I have done. All right, so the problem here is if you listened very loosely and you didn't listen closely, you wouldn't have heard that the only time the word punishment is used is for Babylon itself. And when I go back to what I said before, thus you have brought harm upon yourselves. That's in verse 7. So that is the key difference between a punishment and a consequence. So when you bring harm upon yourself, that is a consequence. So when I tell Zoe, don't climb that tree, Zoe climbs the tree, falls down, and breaks her leg. Now, is that a consequence? Yes. Now, if I choose not to try to save her, which is basically what God is doing here, he's choosing to let the Babylonians do this, then that is still a consequence, even though it looks like a punishment from the person that is falling down to the ground. See, the thing is that you're looking at it from the perspective of the people that are going to be enslaved and captured and brought to Babylon. But you need to look at it from a perspective of the law. The law did not punish them. It probably should have, but the punishment for the law was for God to completely abandon them. That's what it says in Deuteronomy, and that never happened. And that's why it's not a punishment. So the thing is that it's a consequence of losing their identity and not trusting God. And so what I want you guys to think about here is remember that this is what sin really is. Sin is you thinking that you know best and God doesn't. And you can do that even following the law. You can say that I think the law does this and not even bother trying to figure out why you follow the law in the first place. It's kind of like I like to use the eighth commandment as an example. So, did God tell you not to lie? Thou shalt not bear false witness. That's what that means. Or did God tell you not only to not lie, but to value the truth and value your neighbors being accused of things they didn't do and to stand up for their defense? And did God also tell you through that commandment that you should not try to take their stuff through dishonesty? Yeah, all of that is in the catechism. And the reason why it's in the catechism is because that's the stuff that is in the rest of the Bible that pertains to that commandment. And when you leave that out, you leave out the entire reason behind the commandment. And that is far more important than following the letter of the commandment. And so, really, the thing here is that God doesn't ever abandon the Israelites, and the prophets continue to give them hope, and they continue to hear and act on behalf of God's people. Now, we're going to talk about the prophets next time. But think about the prophets like this. You're watching Harry Potter, okay, or you're reading Harry Potter, because I know a lot of people really like the books better than the movies. So you are seeing Lord Voldemort win. He does win for a little bit there. You're seeing him win. But even if you're reading this for the first time or you're watching it for the first time, the writing is telling you who is going to win ultimately and who is going to ultimately triumph over this. And so you, as a viewer, know what's going on and you know what's going to happen. And so that's kind of what the prophets did for the people of Israel. So let's go over one more thing and then we'll wrap up. So one thing I want you guys to ponder is we talked about why God let the Israelites be taken. But is there anything that is happening today that either somebody is saying or you're watching or you're reading that you think God is speaking to you? Okay. So I know that you don't do this naturally. So what I want you to do is to try to think, at least today, or maybe if you were watching this at the end of the day, for tomorrow, to look for some of these things just on that day and see if you find it. I bet you will. So I think let's leave it at that. And if you have questions about this, let me know. Otherwise, I'll wait until we return. All right. Bye.